Today we're diving into an exciting discussion within the competitive world of Pokemon, also known as VGC. Today's topic will be team building. Team building is one of, if not the most important thing to learn within competitive Pokemon, because if you have a bad team, you start off immediately on the back foot and pretty much automatically lose. So for the next 5 minutes, I hope we can cut it down to that at least. I mean, at this point, editor will know, but yeah, we'll be diving deep into the exciting world of team building within competitive Pokemon in order to learn and understand how to craft the ultimate team. Before we can learn how to team build, we must understand what it actually means. You can kind of think of team building as doing Legos or a puzzle. Essentially, think of every Pokemon as a brick to your Lego set, and essentially you just want to create the best Lego set ever created before. When creating a team within Pokemon, you want to make sure that your different Pokemon covers each other's weaknesses and complements each other's strength. And if you don't know how to figure out what Pokemon are weak to what, then check out this video I already made on typings, and that will definitely help you understand what weaknesses and different stuff are in terms of typing. So essentially, if you have a grass type like Rillaboom here for an example in your team, which are weak to fire types, you want to cover Rillaboom's weaknesses by adding like either a ground type or water type like Rapid Strike Urshifu. So when you're building your team, as we just talked about, it's important to understand your weaknesses. One way you can see your Pokemon weaknesses, and in general just your overall team's weaknesses and where you might need to add some Pokemon that can cover or strengthen that weakness, can be on the Marioland Team Builder website. I'll leave it down in the description below as well, so you can check it out. I personally use this myself when I team build because it's such a good tool to see where your strengths and weaknesses are. When choosing a Pokemon in your team, it's vital to understand how you want to play. Do you want to be a hyper-offensive player? Then you just have to hit the fastest and hard-hitting Pokemon in the game. For an example, you can use Calyrex Shadow Rider, but if you want a little bit more bulk and balance in your team, you might choose a Pokemon like Groudon or Zamazenta, which can take a bit more than just one hit usually. Maybe you're actually more into a Trick Room where the dimensions are twisted so that it's actually the slowest Pokemon on the field that moves before the faster ones. In this case, a Torkoal or a Calyrex Ice Rider is an absolute phenomenal choice. There are some few things you need to ask yourself before you start creating your team, because answering these questions can help you understand what type of Pokemon you actually want to add to your team. When you're building a team, you just can't add whatever Pokemon you want to add because they might work individually, but if they don't connect as a team and they don't work as a collective, they might not work out, hence the name team building. To understand this a little bit better, essentially your team is kind of like a car, because you need different parts of your car to function, such as the engine, the brakes and steering, for the car in general to work. Kind of think of your team like that. For example, you can look for combos that will complement each other, and you can choose a Gouging Fire Howl strategy for an example. This strategy relies on that you have your Gouging Fire howling before your physical attackers such as Chien-Pao or Urshifu attacks in order to boost its physical attack so it can hit even harder. Another example of how you can utilize abilities and moves to create nutty combos could be with the Chi-Yu's Breath of Ruin, which lowers every Pokemon on the field besides itself, plus your defense with 25%. You could pair this with a Calyrex Shadow Rider in order to utilize its special attack stat and Astral Barrages even more. There's a bunch of different ways where you can combine your Pokemon in order to make the most out of them, so don't worry, you don't have to use the two examples I just gave. They're just kind of a guideline to what you could use for an example. Essentially, when you build your team, you always want to make sure that in the back of your head you have what role do each Pokemon play on your team. Essentially, a good rule of thumb is that you want a Pokemon which can take care of speed control, which could either be with Tailwind, Trick Room or some Icy Wind, which lower the opponent's speed stat. So by having a Pokemon that can do speed control, you can pressure your opponent into making plays they don't want to play, but they kind of need to play in order to stay in the game, and you can kind of force a mistake out of them. Speed control is so important within competitive Pokemon. I can actually not stress how important this thing is within competitive Pokemon, because essentially it is what decides what Pokemons move first, and you obviously always want to move first in order to deal as much damage as possible. Essentially, if you don't have the speed control, that can be the difference between your Pokemon getting KO'd or picking up a KO. Another rule of thumb you want to make sure you have on your team is a spore or powder immunity in general, such as a grass type or safety goggles item on a Pokemon, because Pokemons like Amoonguss is really powerful in most of the metas with Spore or Rage Powder. So if you can have an immunity to these powders, that is just an incredibly good rule of thumb. And of course, probably one of the most important things within the game is you want to have a sweeper which can hit incredibly hard, and usually you want your sweeper not to be a Pokemon you have to set up like with Swords Dance, Howl, or anything before you attack. You kind of want to make sure that its initial attack stat is high enough that it can pick up KOs without having to be set up first. Having a strong team on paper is not quite enough to have an automatic win, but it can give you a very good advantage though. Team needs to be able to adapt to different scenarios once the games begin. So essentially, be prepared to change your initial strategy and adapt to the game in order to claim your victory. But trainers, remember that team building is much more than what we just talked about. In order to build the best team possible, it's very important that you look at the current meta team in order to either counter it or use the Pokemons from it to maximize the potential of your team. There you go, that is a guide for how to understand team building and the basics of it. I hope today's video helped you and gave you a better understanding of what team building are within Pokemon VGC, also known as competitive Pokemon. And if you have any questions about this, team building, or anything else within Pokemon, especially Pokemon VGC, or other topic you want me to discover, make sure you leave a comment down in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to respond to you down there, or maybe you'll be featured in the next video. Until next time, happy gaming.